So I know that a lot of you are probably thinking to yourselves, I thought we wanted the Beyonder. I'm going to bring you guys the Beyonder. Don't worry. Like, we're going to talk about the Secret War, Secret Wars, or I guess Secret Wars 1, Secret Wars 2, and the Illuminati retcon Beyonder. But what we have to do here is we have to kind of backpedal a little bit. Now, for those of you guys who are keeping up with Time Runs Out, those of you guys who are reading New Avengers and saw New Avengers number 29, when Hank Pym comes back and says, I brought the Beyonders, this conversation is going to be extremely important to you. But kind of a fun fact here, that's the first time we've ever seen what the Beyonders look like. We've never actually seen their physical form before, and there's a reason for that. Kicking this whole thing off, I guess just kind of jumping into it, what we do here is we pick up with Fantastic Four, issue number 319. Now, what this does is give us an explanation on what the Beyonders are and what they do, keeping in mind here that we don't know what they look like. What's explained to us here is that somewhere along the line, the Beyonders had come into existence in some kind of a dark dimension. Now, because this dimension has no light, I would go as far as to say that it has no galaxies or anything, because as we know here in the real world, galaxies reflect light, planets reflect light, moons, so on and so forth. Even the universe itself is putting off some measure of light. And so with there being no light whatsoever in that universe, chances are there is nothing for it to reflect light off of. The Beyonder simply just kind of exists in that reality. But what we know here is that, again, when they came into existence, for some reason or another, they became interested in the Earth 616 continuity. Now, this is expanded on further when we learn that the Beyonders, because they never actually leave their native dimension, had employed a extraterrestrial race, an alien race in the Earth 616 continuity called the Nuwali. Now, the Nuwali were paid by the Beyonders. That is to say, they were paid in gold. And the whole purpose of the Nuwali being paid by the Beyonders was for the Nuwali to come to the planet Earth and to effectively create the Savage Land. The Savage Land, as those of you guys know who have either read the comics or even saw X-Men the Animated Series, is a place in Antarctica where you have a mishmash of ecosystems that are coinciding together. You have people living with dinosaurs, you have technology, so on and so forth. This is the entire basis for this. The Beyonders wanted to study the concept of evolution. They wanted to study why it is and how things evolve from one thing to the next, because presumably they were just endowed with some kind of power. Again, we don't really know that. And so what the Nuwali did is they spent around 10 to maybe 15,000 years going through the process of basically curating this giant, ecosystem, taking all different kinds of alien life, all different kinds of life over time from the planet Earth and throwing it all onto this location into the Savage Land. And so what happened is that following their knowledge of evolution, after studying the Savage Land, for some reason or another, again, we don't really know here, the Beyonders and the Nuwali parted ways. And so what the Beyonders did is they created a group called the Fortesquians. Now, the Fortesquians were designed specifically to follow the orders of the Beyonders, but what they had also done is they had created the Fortesquians for the purpose of basically analyzing why people exist, why aliens exist, what's the purpose of life in the universe, in the Earth 616 continuity, because again, for reasons that aren't explained to us, they've become particularly interested in this continuity. And so what the Fortesquians report back to the Beyonders of is that basically we exist to attain the things we don't have. That's what drives us. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's a life mate. For some people, it's power. It really just kind of depends on the life experiences and what makes that character or alien who they are. And so as a result, the Beyonders had rationalized that if sentient life exists in the Earth 616 continuity, if it exists to attain the things it doesn't have, then perhaps it can move to the next stage of its evolution and eventually reach the kind of omnipotence the Beyonders have reached if they were given a tool to do so. And so what the Beyonders did is they went to the negative zone, and inside the negative zone, they began placing these various little packets of energy that could be accessed here. Now, this is very important here because this will lead into the whole creation of the Beyonder. With these little packets, these little pieces of energy around the negative zone, what would happen is that a portal could be opened to the negative zone, and the energy could be siphoned out, or the energy would be exposed. From there, the energy could be contained inside of some kind of a casing of sorts, and thus it would become the cosmic cube. This is how cosmic cubes came into existence. Now, again, the cosmic cube as it exists in the Earth 616 continuity doesn't exist the same way as it does in other continuities, but the fact remains, this is how the energy is gained. Think of it as if you were getting water into a water balloon, the water being the energy from the negative zone and the balloon being the I guess the casing that would become the cosmic cube. As the balloon fills up with water, the balloon becomes something that you can use. It becomes an effective tool. The purpose behind this was, again, for basically sentient life to use the cosmic cube to grant itself its desires, to achieve whatever it wanted to achieve. And so what had happened was that when Owen Reese, when Molecule Man had gained his powers, when he had his, I guess his electromagnetic incident, he had torn open a hole, torn open a portal to this excess energy that had been left by the Beyonders. But rather than the portal being able to find a place for it to go to, rather than it finding a casing, the portal did, or I guess the energy did two things. The first thing that happened is that part of the energy traveled into Owen Reese, making him the Molecule Man, making him one of the most powerful beings to ever exist in the history of Marvel Comics, and probably a character whose power exceeds the Living Tribunal if we're talking about pre-Redcon, which we're not going to get into. But the rest of the energy just kind of festered and developed and gained sentience. And when it did, it became the Beyonder. Now, the Beyonder began to question, it began to analyze humanity, analyze the planet Earth, as well as life throughout the entire Earth 616 cosmos. And so what it did is it wanted to study the concept of good and evil. Why do people fight each other? What's the entire basis here? And so what it did is it took various superheroes and supervillains from across the entire Marvel continuity, the entire Marvel landscape, and it threw them onto two separate vessels. Now, in truth, this was basically an entire concept whereby Marvel had taken the most prominent members. And so we saw Galactus, we saw Ultron, Doctor Doom, various characters who existed throughout the Earth 616 continuity who were well known. There was really no reason to include extremely obscure characters because fans wouldn't know who they were. And so once the Beyonder had created Battle World, once he created this mishmash of different planets that were combined into a single planet, he put them all down there and said they can fight, and whoever it is that wins will get their heart's desire. One of the most infamous phrases of the Beyonder. From here, once the actual Secret Wars conflict comes to an end, then we pick up with Secret Wars 2. And this is when the Beyonder appears that people most commonly think of. That is to say, the guy wearing the all-white suit with the curly gray or curly black hair. Now, initially, he doesn't appear that way. When he appears to Owen Reese, he appears as a mishmash, kind of a patchwork of various characters that he had seen in the during the Secret Wars event. He has kind of the logo of the Fantastic Four on his chest. He has a little bit of the Champion in him. He has just different forms of characters. And his entire purpose as he's here, at least as far as he explains to Owen Reese, is that he's here to understand. Now, the best way to think of the Beyonder here is as a newborn baby. He just doesn't understand anything. He doesn't understand anything about why we do what we do. And that's his purpose. Why do people get up and brush their teeth in the morning? Why do we go to work? Why do we pay for things with money? Why do all these different things happen? Why do people do drugs? These are the kind of things the Beyonders seek to learn. This is what he wanted to understand. But the real cool experiences that come across with the Beyonder are when he comes across various criminals, different elements and things like that. And one of the really interesting scenes here is when he comes across a woman of the night, and ultimately he's more or less, I guess, put into a circumstance where he's with various other women, and I guess, all right, the Beyonder has sex with hookers. There, I said it. That's what happens. I don't know how else to say it, but that's basically what happens. He's undergoing all these experiences. He's undergoing all this whole process of learning things. But the fact remains that the Beyonder, in terms of Secret Wars 2, moves from this omnipotent kind of character in Secret Wars 1 to becoming this character that's learning about life, learning about things, understanding how things progress. Again, much in the same way that we do as people. Now, what this leads us into is the Brian Michael Bendis retcon of the entire Beyonder. And the reason why is because what we had found was that this was just kind of an open-ended thing, that Secret Wars 2 came to an end. There were some pitches and I guess some patches here and there where the Beyonder appeared in different stories and he was mentioned from time to time and things like that, but it was never really a closed-off thing. It was never really, here's how the entire situation ends. What happens is that Brian Michael Bendis, I guess, says that during the initial conflict of Secret Wars, that Charles Xavier had read the mind of the Beyonder, and that when he did, Charles Xavier had learned that the Beyonder is a combination of inhuman and mutant, making him an inhuman mutant, that he was born an inhuman, but that he has a mutant gene. And so when he underwent exposure to the Terrigen Mist, it granted him hitherto just unfathomable powers. Now, in truth, a lot of comic book fans were very mad about this. They were very angry about this because this did two things. The first thing it did is it took away the ambiance of the Beyonder. It took away the idea of this character, the Beyonder. The second thing it did was that that it made the Beyonder someone who could be defeated. The greatest aspect of the Beyonder, the greatest element of the Beyonder, was that he is from the Beyond verse. He is from a universe that exists outside the entire Marvel multiverse, that all things change, that all things are totally different, that he is the amalgamation of all sentience. For him, things just are. They're just there. Like, he's just it. Like, there's nothing to understand, there's nothing to learn, there's nothing to experience. People loved the idea of watching a character grow and expand and try different things. With Brian Michael Bendis coming back and saying, nope, he's a mutant inhuman hybrid, it takes away from this effect. But again, this is just one of those things where it's up to personal preference. There are some people that love this concept, that love the idea of an inhuman that has a mutant gene. The question being, what happens when they undergo exposure to the Terrigen Mist? These are things that, again, it's really just kind of left up to personal preference. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. There you can keep up with all the updates from Comics Explained and talk to me directly.
But we had one more important sound we wanted you to hear.